Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 3, Part 1. The scene opens on the heath, which, remember from Act 1, Scene 1, is the domain of the witches because it is away from civilization, and as agents of the supernatural, agents of evil and the devil, the witches stay away from civilization in these more remote areas. Your script might also specify that it is thundering once again. Remember that thunder in the play is an example of turbulence and chaos. Enter the three witches. They've been up to no good since we last saw them, and the scene opens with a conversation between the witches about what they've been up to. The first witch asks the question, "Where hast thou been, sister?" To which the second witch replies, "Killing swine, killing pigs." Now, in Shakespeare's day, remember, witchcraft was taken very seriously, and one of the beliefs about witches was that they were not able to kill human beings directly, but they could do things that would cause death, destruction, and chaos. And that's what the second witch has been up to. Killing swine, killing pigs, is going to affect livestock, and it's therefore going to deplete the food supply of a village or town. And it was believed that plagues and diseases among animals and livestock was the result of witches' interference. So Shakespeare, knowing witchcraft as he does, has the second witch out killing pigs in order to disrupt civilization and the human beings living in a particular area. The third witch asks the first witch, "Sister, where thou?" And this is what the first witch says. "A sailor's wife had chestnuts in her lap, and munched and munched and munched. 'Give me,' quoth I. 'Aroint thee, witch,' the rump-fed runyon cries. Her husband's to Aleppo gone, master o' the tiger. But in a sieve I'll thither sail, and like a rat without a tail, I'll do, and I'll do." So what's that all about? Put straightforwardly, this. The first witch has been hovering around, doing witchy things, and as she's been hovering around, she's come across the wife of a sailor who is minding her own business, eating chestnuts. And the first witch has demanded that the sailor's wife give her a chestnut. The sailor's wife isn't having anything to do with this witch. "Aroint thee, witch," is her reply. In other words, sod off, get lost. And the first witch describes the sailor's wife as a rump-fed runyon, basically a fat-arsed old woman. Shakespeare likes to get these bawdy or rude bits of humour even into a tragedy. And the first witch has not taken kindly to being told to get lost or sod off, and so she decides to take her revenge. The first witch knows that the sailor's wife's husband, the sailor, is on his way to Aleppo in Syria, and he is the master or the captain of a ship called the Tiger. And so the first witch is going to take revenge on the sailor's wife for not giving her a chestnut by essentially making her husband, the sailor's wife, the captain's life, a complete misery. We're told that she's going to sail out to this ship, the Tiger, in a sieve, which, think about it, a sieve is an object full of holes. It's completely impossible to sail in a sieve, but not for a witch, not for a supernatural being. And Shakespeare gets this description and this image of the first witch sailing in a sieve to deliberately show this idea that the witches are able to do impossible things. Now, what does she mean by I'll do, and I'll do? Well, it's another example of Shakespeare's bawdy, rude humour. What we're being told is that one of the ways in which the first witch is going to get her revenge on the sailor's wife for not giving her a chestnut is she's going to have lots of sex with the sailor. I'll do, and I'll do. She's going to essentially fornicate, have sex with the sailor to get revenge on the sailor's wife for daring not to give her a chestnut. The second witch is going to help out with this scheme. She says, I'll give thee a wind. The first witch replies, thou art kind. And the third witch says, and I another. The witches in general, were believed to be able to control the weather. Remember what we've already said about fog, for example, in Act 1, Scene 1. And that's why the second witch and the third witch say that they will provide wind in order to blow the first witch to the Tiger, this ship on which the sailor can be found. The first witch goes on. You'll notice she has the most to say in this part. I myself have all the other, and the very ports they blow, all the quarters that they know in the shipman's card. I'll drain him dry as hay. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He shall live a man forbid. Weary Senites 9 times 9 shall he dwindle, peak and pine. Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest tossed. So what's this all about? The first witch is saying that what she's going to do is she's going to make sure that the winds which are provided never allow the ship to dock in port. She's always going to make sure that when the ship is approaching a harbour, the wind will blow it away from the harbour so that the ship can never find shelter. Remember the suggestion that the witch is going to have lots and lots of sex with the sailor, the captain. That is further emphasised when the first witch says, I'll drain him dry as hay. Just use your imaginations for that one. She's going to have so much sex with him that he's never going to be able to rest. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He'll never be able to close his eyes. By penthouse lid, she's talking about his eyelids. He's never ever going to be able to sleep because the first witch is going to keep him awake in her revenge. I'm sure it's a revenge that she will enjoy and he will not. Notice that we've got that reference again to the supernatural occult number 9. Remember, 3, 6 and 9 are important numbers within the occult. And weary Senites, tired weeknights, 9 times 9, shall he dwindle, peak and pine. This sailor is going to be completely exhausted by what she's going to do to him. No wonder he's going to dwindle, peak and pine. He's going to waste away because he's not going to be allowed to eat. He's not going to be allowed to have sleep. He's not going to be allowed to have any refreshment at all. Then she says, though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest tossed. Remember what I was saying a little bit earlier, that it was believed that witches could not directly kill a human being, but they could influence their deaths. That's what she means when she says, though his bark cannot be lost. Bark, ship. Though the ship cannot be destroyed directly, it cannot be lost. It will be tempest tossed. It will be a very stormy journey for this particular ship. And therefore the human beings on board the ship, the captain included, may well be injured and might be killed as a result of those injuries. She has one more line in this speech. Look what I have. The second witch, eager to see it, says, show me, show me. The first witch reveals then a rather gruesome, macabre trophy. Here I have a pilot's thumb, wrecked as homeward he did come. A pilot, of course, remember this play was written in the early 17th century and is set in the 11th. Pilot is not referring to an aircraft or anything like that. It was a pilot's job to guide a ship safely into harbour. Somehow or other, this first witch has managed to get hold of a pilot and has chopped his thumb off and is keeping it as a rather gruesome and macabre trophy. The reason this image is in here is once again Shakespeare, through the language of the witches, is revealing to the audience the way in which witches behave in a disgusting manner and can injure and hurt human beings, and she's kept this thumb as a trophy. The reference to the pilot, of course, is another of those which is emphasising the fact that this sailor, this captain of the Tiger, is never ever going to be able to find safe harbour while she's busy having her revenge upon him. We then have the stage direction drum within. In other words, there is a sound of a drum coming from over the heath, and the third witch states, a drum, Macbeth doth come. Macbeth is on his way. Remember, that's who they are there to meet upon the heath. They were arranging that in Act 1, Scene 1. Then the sisters, the weird sisters, the witches chant together. The weird sisters, hand in hand, posters of the sea and land, thus do go about, thrice to thine, and thrice to mine, and thrice again to make up 9. Peace. The charms wound up. They've been casting a spell. They're getting ready to meet with Macbeth and to give him the prophecies that they are there to give. And so Shakespeare has them perform this incantation, this spell. In fact, they even say at the end, the charm, the spell is wound up, ready, complete. Then we have the stage direction. Enter Macbeth and Banquo. So this is the first time in the play so far that we have actually seen Macbeth. This is the first scene in which he appears. He was mentioned very briefly in Scene 1 by the witches. He is spoken about in glowing terms in the second scene of Act 1, given what he's done for Duncan's kingdom that day, but so far we haven't actually seen him. And here he is. And his first line is incredibly significant. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. Now the attentive student, and that includes you, may well notice that Macbeth's first line is very, very similar to a line that we've already heard in the play so far. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. Think back to the end of Act 1, Scene 1, when the witches said, fair is foul and foul is fair. The wording of Macbeth's first line is not identical, but it is very, very similar. And of course, it is a paradox, but once again, a paradox that makes a certain sense. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. The fact that this line is so similar to the witch's line, and the fact that it's a paradox, is very deliberate on Shakespeare's part, because by using the same sort of language, he's forging that close link between Macbeth and the witches. Again, it's designed to make us suspicious of him. This man, our supposed hero of the play, even speaks like the witches. But just like some of the witches' paradoxes, what Macbeth says actually makes sense. What he's saying is that the day that he's just experienced has been both foul and fair. How so? Well, if you think about it, it's been a foul day because the Kingdom of Scotland has been attacked firstly by a rebellion led by MacDonald, and then they'd only just defeated that when the Norwegians invaded. And given that Macbeth is the captain of Duncan's army, it's been foul because of this awful situation that they've found themselves in. And it's also foul because Macbeth will have seen many of his men killed in the battle. At the same time, it's been fair because even though they've had these battles, ultimately Duncan's forces, led by Macbeth, have won. So the circumstances have been foul, but the result, the victory, has been fair. Banquo, and we've heard of him before, but again this is the first time he actually appears in the play, is just making conversation with Macbeth. He says to him, "How far is it called to Forres?" Forres is where they're going. It's a place in Scotland, and he's simply asking Macbeth, how far is it until we actually get to Forres, this place that they're heading for? Now, this is sometimes where reading Shakespeare can be a little bit more complicated than watching it, because Shakespeare's lack of stage directions in certain places makes the action and what's being said a little bit harder to understand, and this is one of those examples. Because in Banquo's first line, "How far is called to Forres," he's chatting away to Macbeth. He's minding his own business, talking about where they're going, but there's no stage direction that tells us that he's just caught sight of the witches, but that's what's happened. He's noticed these three women standing on the heath in front of them, and that's why he then asks Macbeth this question. "What are these, so withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it?" Here is the first and really only description in the play of what the witches actually look like, and it comes from what Banquo observes. He notices that they are withered and wild in their attire. So we get this impression of them being withered, wrinkly and ugly old women. We're also told that their clothing, their attire is wild, so we probably imagine, shredded garments, rags. They're not dressed in a particularly elegant manner, far from it. Some interpretations suggest that wild might actually mean that they are naked, and that might actually have some validity given that the witches do not conform to what society would expect. They don't conform to the norms of society, although it's very, very unlikely that that's actually how they would be presented on stage. Whatever it is about them, they look not like the inhabitants of the earth. They don't look human. And yet, here they are on it. He stops asking the question of Macbeth here and addresses the witches directly. "Live you? Are you alive? Or are you aught that man may question? Can I actually speak to you? Can I question you? You seem to understand me, by each at once her choppy finger laying upon her skinny lips." So when Banquo asks the question, "Live you, or are you aught that man may question?" each of the witches puts a finger to their lips, as if to say, "We're not going to speak to you at the moment." Banquo then makes this observation. "You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." So another of the ways in which these women, these witches, don't look like ordinary women is that they have beards, according to what Banquo says here. Again, this is Shakespeare, through the language that he gives Banquo, trying to give us this impression of the witches not being normal. There is something abnormal and odd and strange about them. They don't look human, nor do they look particularly feminine. Just as a little aside here, in Shakespeare's day, women were not actually allowed to act on stage. So maybe one of the reasons why Shakespeare has Banquo observing that they look rather masculine is because the original actors who would have been playing the witches would have been men and not women. Just a little bit of trivia for you there. We then get to Macbeth's second line, which is also significant because it tells us a little bit about his character. Confronted with these three strange women, Macbeth says, "Speak, if you can. What are you?" Immediately, we are given the impression of Macbeth very much as a man in charge. He gives an order. He speaks with an imperative. Speak. He's a man of authority, Remember, he's a captain in the army. He is also a thane, a lord. He is a man used to giving instructions and used to being obeyed. So he comes across as really quite forthright and strong in this line when he demands that the witches speak. Then we get to one of the most important episodes in the play, the prophecies of the witches. The first witch says to Macbeth, "All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." The second witch, "All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor." Third witch, "All hail, Macbeth! That shalt be king hereafter." Just be very careful at this point, because I've heard time and time again people saying that the witches make 3 prophecies to Macbeth. They don't. They make 2. And it's important to acknowledge that, because the first thing which is said, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." Shakespeare's very clever in the way he writes this, because he understands the psychology of persuasion. Let me explain what I mean by that. Witches in Shakespeare's society were not people that you could trust. You would not trust what a witch said to you. After all, she's an agent of evil. She's an agent of the devil. She's there to deceive. She's there to cause chaos and confusion. Now, put yourself in Macbeth's situation. Here he is, minding his own business, on the way back from a battle, and he is going to be told that in the not too distant future, he's going to be Thane of Cawdor, and, even more unlikely, he's going to be king one day. Now, the witches clearly understand the way that people perceive them, that they're not to be trusted. So how do they gain Macbeth's trust? They gain his trust, firstly, by calling him by name. They know him. He doesn't know them. They know him. And they also know that he is already Thane of Glamis. So before they give him the 2 almost impossible prophecies, they lull him into a false sense of security and gain his trust by telling him something he already knows, because it's what he already is. "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." The psychology being, tell him a truth, and then he'll believe what we say next. Then come the 2 prophecies. The second witch states that he's going to be Thane of Cawdor. She addresses him as Thane of Cawdor. And then the third witch says that one day Macbeth will be king. Banquo speaks next, because Macbeth is so startled and so shocked by what he's just heard that he can't speak, and we know that because of what Banquo says. "Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair?" So Macbeth, this brave warrior, who was commanding and demanding the witches only a few lines ago, is so shocked by what he's just heard that he actually looks afraid. He looks startled. Banquo is not as startled by what the witches have said. I think there's a reason for that, and we'll delve into that a little bit more deeply in the not too distant future. He stops speaking to Macbeth at this stage, and he addresses the witches directly. Banquo says this: "In the name of truth, are ye fantastical, or that indeed which outwardly ye show? My noble partner you greet with present grace and great prediction of noble having and of royal hope, that he seems rapt withal. To me you speak not. If you can look into the seeds of time, and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours, nor your hate." Banquo gives the impression here that he is not frightened by the witches in the way that Macbeth is. In fact, while Macbeth is stood there looking startled, Banquo interrogates the witches further. He observes the fact that they've just made these predictions of greatness to my noble partner. Now, Banquo wants to know, if you are able to look into the future, if you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, give me some predictions, give me some prophecies, tell my future. So while Macbeth is stood there looking startled, Banquo is busy challenging the witches. Why the difference? Why is it that Macbeth is startled? Why is he rapt with awe? Why is he speechless? I think it comes down to the fact that Shakespeare is already letting us know at this early stage that these prophecies that the witches have given Macbeth have demonstrated that the supernatural has a knowledge of Macbeth's ambition. Remember, that is going to be his fatal flaw. What Shakespeare is inferring by Macbeth's startled and frightened response is that it's almost like the witches have read his mind. We seem to be being told here that Macbeth has indeed fantasized about being king. He has thought about being king. It's a secret desire, and yet the witches know about it. They're playing on it through the prophecies. That's why he's stood there so startled. These agents of evil, these agents of the supernatural, know what's going on in Macbeth's mind. Whereas Banquo is innocent. He has none of these ambitions. He is not fantasizing about being king. He is innocent and pure, which is why he is able to face the witches without fear. So remember, he's demanded of them, well actually, not so much demanded, he's asked a bit more politely actually, but he's still set the witches this task. If you can tell my friend's future, tell mine. This is their response. Hail, hail, hail. The first witch says that Banquo will be lesser than Macbeth and greater. Second witch, not so happy, yet much happier. Third witch, thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So all hail Macbeth and Banquo. Banquo and Macbeth, all hail. Now once again you should have noticed that the witches are speaking in paradoxes, but once again they make sense when you think about it and you understand what happens later in the play, which is what I'm going to help you with now. The first witch, in her prophecy to Banquo, says that Banquo will be lesser than Macbeth and greater. Now, how on earth can that be the case? How can you be both lesser and greater? This is my interpretation. Banquo is never going to rise to the same ranks as Macbeth. Macbeth is going to be king. Banquo isn't. So in status and power, he is going to be lesser than Macbeth. But he's also going to be greater, because Macbeth is going to ruin his own reputation and destroy his own morals and goodness by murdering Duncan. Banquo is never going to stoop to those levels. So Banquo will always be greater than Macbeth morally. He will never rise to the position of Macbeth, but he will always be greater in terms of morals. The second witch says Banquo will be not so happy, yet much happier. Spoiler alert, Banquo is going to be murdered by Macbeth later in the play, so he's not going to be happy from that point of view. But remember, to a Shakespearean audience, because Banquo is a good man, he's going to heaven, whereas Macbeth, As an evil man, somebody who's going to kill a king, he is going to one place and one place only, hell. So in this life, Banquo is not going to be happy, but he will be happier than Macbeth in the afterlife, because Banquo's on his way to heaven, or will be once he's killed. Now, pay close attention to this one, because this is a prophecy which is going to come back to haunt Macbeth later in the play, and is one of the reasons why in Act 3 Macbeth decides Banquo has to die. The third witch reveals that Banquo shalt get kings, though thou be none. In other words, Banquo will never be king himself, but Banquo's descendants will be king. And it is the fact that, and I'm sort of not rushing ahead, but I'm having to reveal an important plot point here, but I'll come back to it in more detail later. One of the things that makes Macbeth insecure when he finally gets the kingship is that he has no children to pass the kingship to. He does not have anyone who can, of his own family, that can succeed him onto the throne, and that's going to really bother him. Banquo has got children, he has got descendants, and this prophecy is really going to come back to haunt Macbeth and make him paranoid later in the play, so we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to it. Macbeth finally finds his voice again. He's overcome his shock, and he's back to his demanding, authoritative self. He gives the command, "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more. By Sinel's death I know I am Thane of Glamis, but how of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman, and to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Speak, I charge you." So in this speech, Macbeth orders the witches to stay, and he wants to know more. They've given him a tantalizing hint of the future, but they've not told him how these prophecies are going to come true. They've said that Macbeth will be Thane of Cawdor in future, but they've not said how he will become Thane of Cawdor. They've told him that he will be king in future, but they've not told him how he will be king. That's very deliberate. Remember, the witches are sowing these seeds into Macbeth's mind, knowing that he has the ambition to carry them out. They tell him what's going to happen, but not how it's going to happen, and Macbeth wants to know more. He says, "By Sinel's death I know I am Thane of Glamis." Sinel was Macbeth's father. What he's saying here is, I know I'm Thane of Glamis. I've been Thane of Glamis ever since I inherited the title from my father. But how on earth am I Thane of Cawdor? And what Macbeth says next shows that he did not know that the Thane of Cawdor was a traitor and was helping the Norwegian king, because he says quite innocently, "The Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman." This is an example, and this is a term to learn. This is an example of what's called dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is when the audience are in possession of knowledge that the characters are not. Remember, we the audience already know that Duncan has pronounced the death sentence on the Thane of Cawdor and that he's to be executed. Macbeth doesn't know this, nor does he know that the Thane of Cawdor was in league with the Norwegian king. That's why he says the Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman. Then he goes on to say, "To be king stands not within the prospect of belief." It's like he's saying to the witches, what are you talking about? Me become king in the future? It's impossible. It's beyond belief. And that's why he wants to know more. But I want you to notice this. Macbeth may well be a man of authority. He is a lord and he is a captain in the army. He's used to being obeyed. But he has no power over the forces of the supernatural. And this is where the forces of the supernatural, the witches, only pretend to comply with orders, but they are not going to be commanded by anyone in the human realm. Remember, a few lines ago, when Macbeth commanded the witches to speak, they gave him the prophecies. Why? Because it suited them. It was part of their plan. Now, note what happens. Macbeth wants more information. He says, "Speak, I charge you." And we're told in the stage direction, the witches vanish. Macbeth has no power over them at all. They are the ones in control of this situation. It does not suit them to give Macbeth any further information. So what do? They vanish. And that's exactly what I'm going to do at this point, because there is much more to say on this scene, and that will be covered in Act 1, Scene 3, Part 2. That's the next tutorial, so make sure that you join me then.